So, some people wanted to know how it was that I discovered my identity, which is a great question. I did answer that like very, very thoroughly early on in my posts. So if you want to check back around, I would say 2015, like winter, spring of 2015, I was disclosing a lot of that. But I'll try to do my best to sum it up in video form, and keep in mind that there's a lot to it and it's not all necessarily linear, so it can be kind of hard to explain in that way. And I'm doing it like off the cuff, so I'm totally going to go off on tangents, so be patient with me. Yeah, I was like a non-believer in the spiritual world, was not into religion, anything like that. When I was 35, I got married. That's really when things started getting crazy, so I'll start there. I got married on June 22nd going into June 23rd, which is the 6/23 of 2013, which I didn't realize at the time is the summer summer solstice. And after that, I fell down a conspiracy rabbit hole, starting with the Federal Reserve and 9/11, and then it took me a long time. Like, I was researching that stuff obsessively. It was my life. I wasn't working. I was having a lot of problems with illness at the time, like mental and physical, and that's because right after I'd gotten married, I'd gone off of methadone, and I'd been on that for 7 years. I wasn't ever a heroin addict or anything. I always self-medicated for years with opiates, because they were the only thing that stopped the voices in my head. I'd never ever considered myself schizophrenic, and I was a psychotherapist. Like, the DSM was my Bible. I just figured I had really bad depression and anxiety. And I wasn't schizophrenic. But what is schizophrenia, right? And so I had just always been under spiritual attack, and not knowing what that was. And so this is true for anybody who's hearing those really horrible voices that tell you that you are not good enough, you're a piece of shit, that the world would be better off without you. Even like the more mildly critical ones are coming from a demonic realm. And anyway, so I couldn't function without opiates. They, in low doses, for some people, I think for a lot of people actually, in low doses, they quiet those voices down, if not shut them up entirely. And that's part of why we have a massive opioid crisis in America right now. People end up going too far with it because at the beginning, it protects you, and then if you go too far with it, it lets all the demons in. I was always fortunate that I didn't go too far with it. I really used it medicinally. But anyway, so that's a bit of a tangent. Facing my fear of going off that protective medication in July of 2013 is what opened a doorway. That's how spiritual ascension happens. We face our fears, we face our demons, and then we're allowed to go into a new realm, if you will, of discovery. So much happened in that short time, but the negative side why I was sick is because my husband had caught the most sinister spirit attachment while he was living at a house where there had been a murder-suicide. And it had seemed to go away, but in fact it was still there. And I didn't believe in any of that kind of stuff. I didn't know he had a spirit attachment until after the fact. But in hindsight, when you're sleeping with somebody who has that kind of attachment, your etheric body is most vulnerable when you're sleeping at night, and it that other person's attachment will attack yours. So he would wake up feeling wonderful every morning, and I would wake up feeling horrific. And then as the day went on, our energy would change, and it was just this cycle. I didn't understand why. I was going to different doctors and psychiatrists and just trying to figure out, like, what the F is wrong with me? Like, why can't I get better? And eventually I went to, just going forward a bit, I went to a holistic psychiatrist who told me about spirit attachments. And that was a game changer, to say the least, but that's getting ahead of myself. So my husband and I, my husband, by the way, he is a Son of God figure. He is a reflection of Beauty Pretty, who is Jesus Christ, as Dionysus, who was an early Jesus kind of figure in like the, Roman days. So he and I moved into a house, and when we first went to the house, I heard someone say, like a ghost, if you will, say, "This is your house." And the way they said it, it didn't feel like they meant it was our house, it was my house. And I found out later in the story of Cupid and Psyche, the same thing happens to Psyche. But yeah, I loved that house, and I went through some real ups and downs there. I got back on some, that's a whole other story, but okay. My mother is Aphrodite, and she's also Samael, and she's also, as her soul, Jenny Pretty. So the part of her that's pretty has always been like obsessed with me. And when my husband and I moved into this house, it was like 45 minutes away from where she lived, and she felt like I was abandoning her, and she lost her fucking mind and kept threatening suicide because I'd abandoned her. And then eventually she took a really large overdose, and by the grace of God, an old friend of hers had come into her house and found her unconscious. I mean, it was a miracle. And it was a rough time for me, to say the least, and I started doing heroin. Not a lot, like I was doing at my highest like $10 a day, but still I always had more of a needle fixation when I did heroin. So for like 7 weeks I was shooting up like 3 or 4 times a day, very small amounts. And what it did for me was allowed me to function. So my husband was like, "Oh my God, like you're doing great, what's going on?" And I don't even remember what I said, but yeah, so that went on for 7 weeks, but I didn't have any money. I was like pawning little things here and there, just like, CDs and shit. One time I stole $20 out of my husband's wallet, and I just couldn't bear the guilt of that. And it was December 29th, I took the guy I was usually getting it from, I guess he'd gotten arrested or whatever, he wasn't around anymore, and so I went to a stranger, and it was a really sketchy deal, and whatever he gave me, this bag of heroin, looked like no good, but I didn't care. I was so depressed, I just didn't care, so I shot it up, and nothing happened. In this timeline, there's a competing timeline where I die, and I die December 30th, which was the 20th anniversary of my father's death. And in that timeline, it's my sister who wakes up and discovers her identity as the bloodline descendant, and she has her own story, but in this timeline, it's me. And so yeah, I decided at that point that I needed to go into treatment, and I went into a hospital, and it was bad. Like, my detox was, even though I was doing a really small amount, it wasn't that. It was the darkness, the demons that I had invited into my spirit. And looking back, yeah, like the attacks were really bad. And then once it was out of my system, everyone thought like, oh, I was going to be better. But that's when I became suicidal, and I was still in the hospital. So I was there for about, I don't know, almost a month. And I got out, and the very next day I went and got heroin because I couldn't function. I was so depressed. So then after about a week of that, I got on this medication called Suboxone. And it's like, if you don't know, it's an opiate replacement medication that is somewhat like methadone, but on methadone you kind of like get sleepy and nod out on it. It feels like it's stealing your soul, but Suboxone isn't like that. It just takes away the darkness. It takes away, for other people, it takes away the cravings, and it will stop withdrawals. And it also has something in it so that if you try to do other opiates, it will stop that. It will put you into like instant withdrawals. I've never tried it, so fuck that. I just, like, I'm not trying to get high. I just wanted to not feel the constant need to kill myself. So then that turned into its own nightmare because the doctor prescribed me far too high a dose, and I started having these weird out-of-body experiences. I started having the most severe nightmares, and I was waking up like choking, waking up like hitting my husband because it felt like he was trying to kill me, which in an etheric way, his demon was growing because it was feeding on me every night, so it was getting worse. And in the daytime, he was acting differently. Where he'd always been very affectionate and kind, he became very cold and critical. Nothing I ever did was good enough. He was really kind and affectionate to me when other people were around, and I lived for that. I just wanted him to love me. I was so scared. I was so scared. Those nightmares were horrible, and I'd wake up and I'd see, like, if you've seen Stranger Things, it's like the upside down, like everything turned gray, and I could see this like superimposed layer of a different reality on top of the one I was living in, and I couldn't explain it to anyone because I didn't want to sound any crazier than they already thought I was. I could see these like little demonic figures just all around the room, just staring at me all the time. It was horrible. But then I took control of my own health, and even though my doctor didn't want me to do it, I decreased down from 16 milligrams to 2 milligrams a day because I just wanted to be on the minimum of the medication, and then I was doing good. And I was able to start getting my life back together. I wasn't having the kind of attacks that I was before. Although, I mean, I still would wake up choking, feeling like I was being killed. But it wasn't the nightmares anymore. Things were still kind of fucked up with my husband until the spring. And then we had this like rebirth of our relationship, and everything started going so well. It was like a second lease on life. And I was starting to really feel like there was a chance I was going to be happy. It was such... I'm sorry. I haven't talked about this in like a long time. It was such a good summer. We had so much fun. And then in August, I developed this, to be honest, this gynecological condition. I forget what it's called, but basically, sorry, but it like looked like I had a golf ball on my lady flower. It's not, it wasn't, it's, I can't remember what it's called, but it's fairly common, and it was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced in my life. And he got so angry with me about it. We went back to where it was like, what's wrong with you? Why is something always wrong with you? Why can't you just be normal? that's always been my life, is every time something good happens, the rug gets pulled out from underneath me and everything goes to shit. So yeah, August went back to shit and things started getting really weird with him. He started to like scare me when we were alone, and it was just not him. It was a totally different personality than the man I'd known for 10 years. He never hit me. He said he should, but it was just not him. And I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to tell anybody in my life like that my marriage was completely fucked up. I felt like it was my fault because I lied to him about the opiates. So there was a breaking point in September, and there's a whole other story that goes along with this. What time is it? Yeah, there's this whole other story that goes along with it about how I had met my twin flame, Brendan, through my husband, who's the guy I was buying weed from for a couple of years. And the more we hung out, the better, we got along. And I just felt so alive when I was with him. And so instead of stopping by for 15, 20 minutes, I'd stop by for a couple hours, a few hours. Then a couple of overnights. Nothing remotely sexual ever happened with us, but I was falling in love with him. And that happened early on, before I moved in. Well, around the time I'd moved in, so that was November 2013. Apologies. And Brendan and I had agreed to stop seeing each other and talking to each other because it was just getting to be too intense. And he told me that he was in love with me, and I agreed, I know we have to stop this, it's wrong. And I stopped talking to him for 10 months. And then after that time had gone by, all of a sudden I just felt this urge, I'm going to reach back out to him. It's going to be okay this time. We can just be friends. And I went over there and we thought it could be like that. And then I went back over a few days later because I forgot my sunglasses, and then I went back for something else, and it was fuck, I'm right back where I started. I'm in love with this guy. Okay, maybe that's a good place to take a break. Like I said, this is going to be a multi-part story. Thanks for hanging in there. I love you.